You're listening to the Casting for Fun podcast, the show that talks about entertainment, sports, music, and inspirational stories for all to enjoy. We're glad you could join us today. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Now, here is your host, Albert Pineda.
Welcome, everybody, to the Casting for Fun podcast. I am your host, Albert Pineda. And for this week's episode, which is the 40th episode of the podcast, really excited that I've hit episode 40. I'm going to be joined by returning guest, good friend, Peter Hauge. Very excited that I'm getting to chat with Peter again. It was back in February, I think, for episode 6. So when the podcast was brand new, that I got to talk with him. And this week, he returns to the show to talk about comic books, to have a conversation about books that we're enjoying, books that we've enjoyed in the past, the history of comics, particularly his history with interning with Image Comics. I was very excited and interested to hear about his experience working with that company. And we talked briefly about old radio dramas, which is a topic that I don't know much about, but I'm very fascinated to learn more. So I think if Peter's interested in the future sometime, I definitely would love to have him back on to talk about the history of radio dramas, because, it's kind of interesting and fun to think that in the years before television, that's how people got their entertainment. And I mean, there were so many type of dramas that you could listen to on the radio back in the days, like in the early part of the 20th century. So to learn more about that would actually be a really fascinating topic of discussion, I think, for the Casting for Fun podcast. So plan for that sometime in the future. I'll do an episode with that. Hopefully Peter will be able to join me for that as well. In the meantime, enjoy episode 40 of the show, where Peter and I have a conversation about comic books. Returning to the Casting for Fun podcast is my very good friend, Peter Hauge. Peter, how are you today?
I'm really, really great. How are you?
Doing great too, man. It's good to see you. It's good to have you back on the show and to talk about a topic that I know we used to talk about all the time back in high school, which is comic books.
One of my favorites. Yeah.
So how have you been the last time we talked?
I've been really good. Gosh, when was that?
That would have been back in February of this year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So when I just started the podcast, you were episode 5 or episode 6, I think.
Holy smokes.
And what is going to be episode 39 or 40?
No way.
Yeah, I've been keeping it going, man. I love it. This is really fun for me.
I've been seeing you. I know you've been keeping it going, but wow, I didn't realize it had been that many. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Very awesome.
I'm happy to, sorry to interrupt you, Peter. I'm happy to report that I did, in fact, subscribe for my own library card with my local library here in Upland. So I've been utilizing them, going there for studying. I just started grad school. So, I'm definitely spending a lot of time studying.
Very, very cool. Very cool. What did you start grad school for again?
For my MBM, so my master's in business management with Azusa Pacific, so local here, but I'm doing it mostly online.
Incredible, man. We get business students in all the time in the library. Test prep books. A lot of just accessing a lot of the business databases. So no, that's very cool. Good for you, man. I'm happy to hear that.
Oh, thank you. Our conversation definitely sparked my interest. So, I mean, libraries, we'll repeat it again quickly. Take advantage of them. They're fountains of information. So
absolutely. Yeah. Free books, free videos, free movies, free comic books.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to be talking comic books today. And actually it's been pretty cool. So Peter turned me on to a really cool YouTube channel called Beyond Time. So I'm assuming it's run by some of your friends.
Yeah.
They do a show called the Giant Size Spectacular Show, which has been really cool and interesting and fun for me to watch. I think the only episode I missed was the one that you weren't on.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah. So if I can see, Peter's on this episode, I for sure got to watch it. So it's fun just listening to you talk to your friends about comics, and it's definitely something I want to do with you for this episode.
I am all for it. Yeah, no, that's been a lot of fun. Giant Size Spectacular. It's been run mostly by John Hervey, and then my good friend David Green, John Wales, and myself have been getting on, just 4 of us talking about comic books. We've all kind of have some loose associations with the business. I used to work for Image Comics for a really short time in the early 2000s. David Green is a amazing storyboard artist. and just all the guys we've done some work here and there in the comics, but never really quite broke in. But we still just love to get together and sit and talk about comics in a very sort of Gen X kind of focused way. So we try not to get too grumpy and be the old guys who are like, all the new stuff sucks these days. But that happens sometimes, I suppose.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah. In fact, you even talked about it on your last episode that I guess, technically we fall into just the very tail end of Generation X right before millennials started. And I've heard people kind of coin the phrase Xennial, which I guess is kind of like the end of Gen X, but the beginning of millennials. So kind of having like the best of both worlds, I guess.
Yeah, that we did talk about that. The generational sort of sociology is always really interesting to me. And I was born in 1981. Are you the same? You're a little older.
Actually just a year older in 80.
Okay, 1980. So you might be a little bit more easily distinguished as Gen X for that cutoff. But yeah, I've read in different places that anywhere between 1979 to 1981 is this weird sort of pocket generation. And yeah, I've heard Xennial, and I've heard the phrase I really like, someone I heard coin was the Oregon Trail generation.
Oh yeah.
Just describing because I guess Oregon Trail just being that computer program that everyone used sort of in elementary school. That was like the height of technology in our adolescence. And then it wasn't until maybe high school that really computers took off and the internet was a big thing. I mean, I think I was maybe a freshman when I was on America Online.
Even American Online is really dated too now. So
yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, just having that, I guess I've heard it described as having an analog childhood with a digital sort of adolescence. So yeah, I think we're in a cool generation. So whether I'm Gen X, whether I'm millennial, Xennial, whatever, I like it a lot. So.
Oh, me too. And then the one last thing I would say about that is I personally dislike the idea of generalizing and saying, okay, well, if you're from this generation, if you're a millennial, you're eating Tide Pods and staring at your phone all day. So I mean, there's bad things about every generation and there's great things too. So I think let's just celebrate the great and be your own individual person as opposed to being categorized into one era that you were born in.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well said. I don't know if I can expand on that any better. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. So let's jump into some comic talk. And I mean, I for sure want to hear a little bit more about your time with Image, because I know you had mentioned that before. In fact, talking about Image Comics and their founding is actually a particular topic that I wanted to discuss as well. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to my Spider-Man podcast from a few weeks ago.
No, I saw you had done a Spider-Man talk, but no, I didn't catch it.
Oh, no problem. So I wanted to touch just briefly on an aspect of Spider-Man history and lore, which I think you may know. I mean, again, it's a pretty famous one, which kind of ties into the topic of creator content and creators wanting to maintain control over their creations. And I think it's a really fascinating aspect about comics. That story being the death of Gwen Stacy. So I don't know if you're really familiar with that storyline and how it came about.
I mean, I'm familiar with the story and everything that went down, but no, not too much the backstory behind it. But
okay, let me give you just a little bit of brief background on it. I mean, because I don't want to go too much into it when we're talking about our joint stuff. But basically, so Stan Lee had stepped down as the writer of Amazing Spider-Man, and actually had stepped down as the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics at around the same time, like in the early 70s. So Jerry Conway took over as writer when he was only 19 years old, which is incredible to think.
Wow.
And then a gentleman by the name of Roy Thomas took over as editor-in-chief. And as a way to try and boost sales and rejuvenate interest in the comic, they decided to kill off a major character. And after much debate, they decided that Gwen was going to be the best choice. And I guess they had approached Stan about it. And I guess Stan was loosely okay with it, but he doesn't recall or remember, or at least according to interviews I've seen and read about the whole situation. And it's kind of interesting now that he's passed on. I mean, it's kind of lost in the annals of history. So we don't really know for certain now if Stan said yes or no. But my understanding was if he wasn't editor-in-chief anymore, even if he had said, no, I don't want you to kill Gwen, my understanding is they could have done it anyways.
Yeah. So from what I understand, and my friend David is really a great one to ask as far as the history of all the different editors go. But from what I definitely understand, Back in those earlier days, in especially the 70s and 80s, the editors of Marvel were very, very focused on continuity, and they would make sure that a lot of the storylines were consistent throughout all the books. That's why in a lot of those comics you would always see little references in the panel. Someone would make mention of something that had happened, and you'd see a little footnote that says "See Amazing Spider-Man number whatever." Yeah. So I know that was definitely a big deal. So I don't know how the power structure and everything works, but or worked back then. But yeah, I can definitely see. If those editors were on some big storyline that was spanning across multiple titles, I don't know if the CEO at that point really has too much input on what can be said. I wouldn't know how it works, but that's interesting. If there was some sort of little internal kind of struggle happening that caused Gwen Stacy to get iced.
Yeah, and then it's kind of funny too. So they mentioned, or Jerry Conway's mentioned in interviews that I've seen or listened to on podcasts he's done, is that Stan took a lot of heat because a lot of fans were just assuming that, okay, you're the one who did it. So when Stan would go on speaking tours, colleges, fans were pretty upset and up in arms about it. So I guess that's why they introduced the Clone Saga, to bring in a clone version of Peter, a clone version of Gwen, which was kind of like hit or miss with fans. I know. I kind of enjoyed it, but I know it was kind of a mixed reaction to that particular storyline.
Yeah, that was the Scarlet Spider storyline, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was revisited in the 90s. So almost 2 decades after they killed Gwen.
Right. Wow. Gosh. Yeah, it's funny how they're always trying to shake things up like that, and then end up always sort of making things worse for themselves. Spider-Man wasn't really my big comic when I was younger. When I got back into comics when I was 15, 16 years old, I became much more of a DC guy. I think there was.
I remember that about you. Yeah,
I think there was something to the Marvel stuff that was a little bit. And maybe it was just the time that I'd gotten into it. Maybe it was a little bit too frenetic and just too wild and crazy. I would try watching, the X-Men cartoons, and then I would go and pick up an X-Men book, and I couldn't follow a single thing. Mm-hmm. And I remember that also being the case with Spider-Man, picking it up and seeing that there was, the Scarlet Spider, seeing that. I always thought Mary Jane was his main squeeze, and then reading all about the Gwen Stacy stuff was definitely harder for me to get into back in the day, which is weird considering my first comics were Marvel comics, but it wasn't when I was about 14 or 15. I started picking up DC a bit more. But it's funny you mentioned them messing with Spider-Man, because what got me hooked on comics was them messing with Superman and all the same kind of marketing things that they would pull, like the death of Superman. That's still for me the big defining moment in comics that really sort of drew me in. So.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So that leads us into Image Comics, which the formation of Image Comics took place around that same time, so the early 90s. So that's kind of interesting for me to think that, whether it's, the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, at any time in history of comics, you've probably had those issues in things that need to be resolved with creators wanting to maintain control over their creations, but not necessarily being able to do so, which led to Image. So if you can fill in the listeners, if you know the history pretty well of how Image was founded, and then tie into how you got into your internship with Image.
Yeah, so you basically got it just right. There was a group of really big creators at the time. Oh my gosh, who was the original creator? So Jim Valentino, Jim.
In my notes, I have some of the names here. So Jim McFarlane, Mark Silvestri.
There's the fourth.
Yeah, Jim Lee. And Jim Lee was one of the big ones too.
Yeah, cool. That was the four. Jim Valentino, Silvestri, Valentino, and so when I was maybe 17 or 18 and looking to start working, I knew I wanted to be in the comic book business, and I wanted to write more than anything. Aquaman was my goal. That's what I had set my sights on. That's what I wanted to write. But DC Comics was all the way in New York. Not that I needed to live in New York in order to be a writer, but I also really just wanted to work in the business. Mm-hmm. I learned Image Comics at the time. Again, the early 2000s, they were working out of Orange in California. And so while they were in the Orange office, this is when Jim Valentino was at the time head of Image. Image, by this time in the 2000s, they had started to break off and start doing their own thing. They split off into Top Cow, which did like all the Spawn stuff. That was Todd McFarlane. So I'm sorry, getting a little ahead of myself. Backing up. Just like you say, Image was started by those four guys. They were some of the big heavy hitter creators at the time. And yeah, basically they were getting tired of creating characters that Marvel and then DC would just outright own. They'd be creating some insanely popular characters that they just wouldn't end up making very much money off of, other than the story that they wrote. I want to say X-Force was really big at the time, and characters like Cable, I feel like was one of their creations. Anyway, so they decided to start Image Comics, which the idea behind it was that they were going to be the publisher of a comic, but that creators would own absolutely everything. So it would have the Image label on it, but if you were to put out a book of, really great Ultraman, you would be the one who would own all of that. Image wouldn't get any of it. If you were to go on and have a movie made, they would only get their really small cut. And I can get more into how that business model worked a little bit later. But when I got into Image, like I said, it was early 2000s. They had their Orange office, and I wanted to be in the business, and so I had written some stuff here and there, just like fan stuff, nothing that had gotten published, but was definitely trying hard to get in that business. And when I learned that they were in Orange, which was more or less driving distance for me, I started calling them on a daily basis and just saying, "Hi, my name's Peter Hauge. I'm wondering if you guys offer any kind of an internship program." And I got absolutely nowhere. "No, sorry, that's not how it works around here." We just get hung up on. And I'd call back maybe a couple days later, just try asking a little bit more questions. And finally, I got the name of a guy, Anthony Bozzi. He was the director of marketing of Image at the time. And so they said, Anthony is the guy you'd probably want to talk to about that, but he's really busy, so try back later. And so I called back on just a regular basis, leaving voicemails for this guy, always leaving messages, trying to get this guy to call me back so I can get some kind of internship, just get someone on the phone who worked in the business. And I must have called him about 20 times and never got anything back from him. And one night I got a page. This is how long ago it was. Someone had paged me. And so I called this number back, and it looked vaguely familiar. And I was like, gosh, why do I know this number? Call it back. And it's his voice saying, "Is this Peter Hauge?" Saying, "Yes, it is." It says, "Stop calling Image Comics. Stop calling me. Stop calling Anthony Bozzi. Don't call Image again. I have no jobs for you. I have no internships for you. Stop it." And he lets out a deep sigh. He's like, "I'm sorry about that. What are you doing tomorrow? You want to have breakfast?" And I'm like, "I would love to have breakfast with you." He's like, "Okay, come on. I'll have breakfast with you, kid." And so we have breakfast with this guy, where he then goes on to tell me that the business is incredibly saturated. You can't get a job anywhere with a publisher. It is just a really hard business to get into. But if I come back tomorrow, he'll give me an internship at Image Comics. So after pestering this guy for months, and after him hazing me just a little bit on the phone, he decides that I can intern there and start sorting through his emails. So that's what I did. I went to Image Comics, started interning there, hung out once a week with this guy, Anthony, and he would show me the ropes. About a month later, he gets fired. Oh. And so I'm thinking, where does this leave me? Like, what happened to my internship? Nobody else really knew me. Jim Valentino, he was, like I said, he was running the place, but he didn't care who I was or know anything about me. So I didn't know what to do. So I just kept showing up every week. I would just show up for my internship. And, finally they're just like, "Who are you again? Like, what do you do here?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm the intern. Anthony hired me." And so I eventually started working for this other guy, the director of production. And after like a year of filing his emails and sorting his all the production files. They finally gave me a job as their traffic and inventory controller. And so I worked for about a year, getting on creators, making sure that they were meeting their deadlines, seeing that books got to the publisher on time, all that good stuff. So it was a lot of fun.
Oh, awesome. All the years that I've known you, I don't think I've ever heard that story before. So that's actually fascinating stuff. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Very good. Very good. That's good to hear. And I mean, I'm glad even if you wasn't there for very long, that you got that experience and that, I guess it kind of shows. I mean, if you really want something, I mean, maybe be persistent, don't let someone tell you just flat out no.
Absolutely. No, there was definitely a lesson to be learned about persistence there. It was pretty sad because after interning there for a year and then after working there for a year, things with the guy that I ended up started working under got really sort of nasty. And even though I'm working in like a dream place, doing what I always wanted to be doing, at the end of the day, everyone's still got a boss. And sometimes bosses just can be kind of crummy to work for. We had a really, really toxic working relationship. And so I quit after working there for about a year. And maybe 3 months later, I get another call from the guy that they replaced Anthony with, Eric Stevenson, who's now the current publisher of Image. And he said, "Hey, Peter, we got rid of that guy you were working under. We want you to take his job as director of production." And I'm like, "That sounds great. Sign me up." He says, "But we're moving to Oakland." So at the time, I couldn't do it. I was just starting my family. Nina, I think, was we were talking about having kids, and just I wasn't able to move to Oakland. So I pretty much had to bow out of the comic business altogether, which was really a shame. But it is what it is, and so I'm happy where I ended up as a librarian. So it was still a really, really cool experience. Met a lot of really neat creators. Just learned more about the business, I think, than I ever would have as a reader. So I'm still always grateful for that experience. It was very cool.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds really, really cool and awesome. And then speaking of the creators, so it's actually kind of interesting. So another aspect of Image Comics was that in that time frame, the creators and the writers, the illustrators, the artists were becoming, in some cases, just as big, if not bigger, than their creations. And it got to the point where sometimes you would pick up a book just because so-and-so was writing it or so-and-so was illustrating it, which I thought was a really fascinating, cool concept to get into, because you can see today, like, random people, random celebrities will jump in and actually write or illustrate comics, which could entice fans to want to pick up a copy of so-and-so's work just because they were working on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been going on for a while. I feel like one of the people that I remember that being a big deal on was Kevin Smith, the director of Clerks and Mallrats and all that. Back, when was it? Late 90s, maybe, or maybe early 2000s. He started writing comics, and it was a big deal. It was like, oh my God, Kevin Smith is going to write comic books. It's got to be good. And from what I remember at the time, it wasn't that good. Like I wasn't super into his stuff, but yeah, people were definitely picking up stuff just because it was written by Kevin Smith. There was that other guy who was on, what was that reality show? Big reality show that was on MTV. They all live together.
The Real World.
Yeah, The Real World. Yeah. And then there was one of the guys that went on from The Real World to become a writer. Is that Judd Winnick?
I think so.
Was that who it was?
I think so.
Yeah. So no. Seeing like different celebrities and stuff get into the comic business was always really interesting. Seeing who would get attached to stuff. And I mean, people have been doing that for a really long time just to sell books. You'd get a really great artist to do a cover, but you have someone else doing the interiors. People would pick up books all the time just because, Gil Kane did a really amazing cover of something, but, didn't do any of the interiors. Alex Ross, I feel like he does primarily covers, and that sells a lot of books. You get an Alex Ross cover, and, people people are definitely going to pick that up. I saw that at Image all the time when we were doing Battle of the Planets. Was doing a reboot. Alex Ross did a cover for Battle of the Planets, and I think that was one of the more popular variant covers that we did. Gosh, now that I think about it, when I was at Image, that was when all the reboots were happening. That's when they were rebooting G.I. Joe, Masters of the Universe was coming back, Voltron was doing a thing. It was like any 80s property that someone could get their hands on and reboot into a comic book they were doing at the time. It was crazy.
Oh yeah, very cool, very crazy. You know what? It's interesting to me that you would bring up Kevin Smith and Alex Ross, because there is a particular book that they worked on that immediately sparked my interest. And Kevin Smith had actually teamed up with another good buddy of his to actually write it. The comic in question is Batman 66 Meets the Green Hornet, which was co-written by Ralph Garman from K-Rock here in LA, which was really, really cool. So I know Kevin Smith has been a longtime friend of the Kevin and Bean show back when Kevin and Bean was still around. I mean, K-Rock now, but so I remember they brought him on the show and they announced, hey, Ralph and Kevin are going to write Batman 66. And if you're a fan of the Kevin and Bean show, you know that Ralph Garman's like the biggest fan of the Adam West Batman. So the whole idea that they were going to be writing that issue or that series of comics was really enticing to me. And throw in the Green Hornet, which actually existed at around the same time, the Green Hornet show. So the whole concept of Batman 66 meaning the Green Hornet was really, really cool. And the album, I'm sorry, not the album, the cover of that particular comic was illustrated by Alex Ross. So that was one that really sparked my interest. Like, I got to pick up that issue as soon as it's available. So I'm wondering, for you personally, have there been issues or comics that you wanted to pick up just because of who was writing it and who was illustrating it?
Yeah, there's definitely been books that I've picked up just for the writers. My big writer that I followed for the longest time was Peter David. He was writing Aquaman at like the height of when I was just really digging Aquaman. He was writing the Incredible Hulk. He had just finished up on X Factor. He was a big Star Trek writer at the time, so definitely anything Peter David was doing at the time, or even now, I was all over. His Supergirl run was incredible. He did the book Young Justice, which I think it was on Cartoon Network, or they currently did on Cartoon Network. Like Young Justice has sort of turned into its whole other thing, and he's a creator right there.
Yeah,
I always kind of wondered about he would create some of my favorite characters. People that showed up in the Aquaman books, and then I always wondered like how much money he would get for that, and probably nothing. But I just think it's just always just that very idea of these writers creating characters out of thin air, and then from there putting it in one issue of a comic. It is then permanently and forever a part of that comic's history, and legacy. And I think that's just one of the amazing things about comics in general. But that's a whole other thing. So yeah, Peter David was one that I would definitely follow as far as writers go. I remember when I was a teenager, like 16 or 17, again, reading Aquaman that Peter David was on. The guy who was drawing, his name was Marty Eglin. And I mean, I look back at his stuff now and it's whatever. I mean, he was a great artist. But when they took him off the book, I remember being devastated. I had never been so upset at I couldn't care less if they were to change, who was playing who on a television show, or, the writer or the director of a show. Could never care less about something like that. But when they took Martin Eglin off of Aquaman, I freaked out. Not freaked out, but I was like really upset about it. Going back to AOL, DC used to run these chat rooms that the editors would do every week or so. An different editor would jump in and run like a little Q&A. And Kevin Dooley was the writer or the editor of Aquaman at the time. And sure enough, he did one of his sessions, and I got in there and I remember being in that chat room saying, "Why did you get rid of Martin Eglin? What's the deal? Like, that was amazing." And it was the coolest thing, having the editor write back to me and just say like, "Hey, the guy was a great artist, but he's just too slow." And that was like one of my first times like having a real discussion with an editor or someone in the business, and hearing like, yeah, talent, really means a lot. But if these people aren't able to meet deadlines, like, this isn't the business for you. So Martin Eglund was a guy that I was really big into. Matt Kint is a guy right now that anything he puts out, I'm all over. Mind Management is incredible. I'm pretty sure that's in production right now, and Keanu Reeves is attached to it.
Cool.
I know Matt Kint and Keanu Reeves are working on something. I want to say it's Mind Management, but now that I'm looking at my shelf, I think it might be another project. But yeah, Matt Kint, I'll definitely pick up a lot of his stuff. So yeah, those are probably my big ones that I'm into. I'll be honest. I mean, I'm trying to get back into what's out there right now. I spend a lot of time on the Marvel Unlimited app and on the DC app, trying to read the new stuff. I can't go into a comic book store and buy books anymore to read because they're too expensive. Mm-hmm. You can't spend $5 on a Spider-Man comic and get like 14 pages, of a story. It's just not sustainable. So I use the apps to try to stay current with what's good, and trying to find who the new writers and artists are. But yeah, so it's been a fun journey so far.
No, absolutely. That's actually a really cool suggestion for people who are looking to want to get into comics, to do the apps, because as you mentioned, it can be a really expensive hobby. One thing that I like to do was actually I would wait until a whole series was done and then actually buy the trade paperback for it. So like if you wanted just that would actually be pretty cool to have.
Yeah, that's also another thing. Trades are a big thing. I feel like that's a trend that I kind of missed out on. Like back in the day, that was always like a rarity, right? If something was a trade or if something was collected as a trade, that was, I don't know, that seemed a little bit more special. And now it's just sort of expected. Like it's expected that they put out 10 issues of this comic and then collect it into a trade. And, you might get some kind of break on the price.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely have felt like a shill for like both the Marvel and DC apps. I think Marvel, it's $10 a month and you have access to like all of their stuff. And it's amazing. I love going back and reading the old stuff more than anything. And to have it all there, like in really spectacular colors, and nothing's faded, nothing is crumbly or yellowed on the paper. It's, I think, the best value in comics right now, which is a sad thing. I mean, I love buying books, I love paper, I love collecting and things like that, but it's just way too expensive right now. So yeah, the apps are definitely my number one suggestion to someone wanting to get into comics.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Shifting gears just a little bit. So this past summer, I did an episode of the podcast talking to one of my buddies about summer blockbuster movies. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of properties you see, like whether it's a show or a movie, is actually based on existing comics that people may not actually be aware of, which is pretty cool. So like we went to like old school like discussion of like, say, The Rocketeer, which came out in 1991, was actually based off of a comic book series, as was Men in Black. So those are two that right now come off the top of my head being really, really cool movies. And by the way, they happen to be based off of comic books. And then maybe there's been a few duds along the way. Like I remember seeing the movie adaptation of Cowboys and Aliens and not thinking that one was that great. But I guess it just depends on your personal preference. So I'm wondering if you have particular favorite, more obscure comics that you like that actually people may not even be aware. I'm sorry, that there were movies that were actually from obscure comics.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned actually both Men in Black and Cowboys and Aliens, because those were both properties that were owned at one point by Platinum Studios, or this guy named Scott Rosenberg, who I did work for very, very briefly when I left Image. I did get another job at this place, Platinum Studios, that did own those properties, and that was pretty much their whole thing. They would buy up and gobble up as many properties as they can, and then try to get them turned into movies. So yeah, Men in Black and Cowboys and Aliens was one of theirs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was another one who, at the time, as a kid in the '90s, all I knew was the cartoon and the action figures. And when I started getting into comics, I had no idea that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was like this super gritty black and white, like really cool book. So
and really violent too.
yeah, very very violent. For sure. Let's see, other ones that were Ghost World was of course a movie that was a comic.
That was Scarlett Johansson, right?
That's right, Scarlett Johansson and Steve Buscemi.
Okay.
And from American Beauty. It's
Mina Sorvia?
No.
Okay. I'd have to Google search.
I feel like a jerk not knowing, but Thor Birch.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Right. But,
I think so.
Oh, okay. I hope so. If I'm wrong, cut that part out. So,
okay.
yeah. Let's see. So, what other? Gosh, I'm sure there was. I know there were. The Boys was one that I'm currently watching right now. That it's a show that I absolutely love. Mm-hmm. I feel terrible that I didn't even know it after watching the first season. I had no idea that it was a comic book before anything else. And I know your listeners are probably going to think I'm terrible for that. But that's one that I've really been digging quite a bit and been meaning to go back and read the comic on. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to see that there's so many great properties that can draw inspiration from the comics. And, if you get into the hobby, you can actually discover all these properties before they actually become famous, which is kind of cool.
Right. And I feel like that's what a lot of people were definitely banking on for a while. And I'm sure they're still doing, they're hoping that their comic is going to get picked up and turned into a movie. I saw that a lot at Image. It was actually kind of sad. So if you don't mind backing up just
oh sure, of course. Yeah.
So when I worked at Image, I worked with a lot of these independent creators, and the way it worked is, like we said, you owned absolutely everything being an independent creator, but that also meant that you had to front everything. So if you were paying an artist, if you were paying anyone for any of the work, you weren't seeing any profits until your book actually made a profit. So a lot of people would accuse Image of having just like a lot of number ones, a lot of number twos, and not a whole lot of number threes in series. Like books would get canceled, and Image would get a bad rap for being the ones canceling these books. Thing of it was, lawnmower or something going on outside. The thing of it was that it wasn't Image that was canceling these books. What you would have is you would have someone come up with a really great comic, and they would write and create one issue, and then they would sell it to, or they would show it to Image, and then Image would say, "Hey, this looks like a great comic. We'll go ahead and put this out for you, and we'll just take a small little cut from the sales." So the book would then get advertised, and comic book stores would see it in this big magazine called Previews. They would see what's coming out from all the distributors, or coming out from the publishers, and they would say, "Oh, hey, here's Albert's book, and this creator's putting out a number one. This looks kind of interesting." Maybe they'd read a write-up about it, and they would order, let's say, 10 copies of the book. Well, next month, they got to put out their orders again, and they see, oh, Albert's book is out again, and it's at number 2. Well, I haven't even seen number 1 yet, because it takes maybe about 3 months after they would order a book for them to actually see it. So by the time they're ordering book number 2, they still haven't even seen book number 1. So if it comes to ordering Albert's book number 2, they're not going to order as many. So they're going to say, well, maybe we'll just buy 5 copies of it this time. So now you have these creators getting their numbers. They maybe sold a lot for number 1. Number 2, they didn't sell so much. Now number 3 comes around. The comics book store is looking at their orders again. They're saying, oh, here's Albert's book again. Number 3 is coming out. Man, I still haven't even seen number 1 yet. Maybe I'll order 2 copies of it. So by that time it comes around, the creators are then completely like deflated. They don't have a 4th book in them. They're going to say, why am I going to come out with a 4th, 5th, 6th book when my numbers for number 3 were so incredibly low? So you then have a lot of people canceling all these books. So you would have this big trend of people creating a book, putting something together, and really hoping that it would get sold into a movie very, very quickly before it would get canceled. And I think you ended up with I don't know, a lot of questionable material. It's changed the way people have done comics completely. It's even changing the way I think Marvel and DC does their comics. It's hard to read anything that they put out now that doesn't feel heavily affected by the movies that have just currently come out, or doesn't feel like something that they're just lining up to be into the next movie, or just sort of I don't know, writing a character to be just rated in the style of a particular actor or something. You see that a lot with what they're doing with Iron Man.
Mm-hmm. So interesting point. Very good. Very good. One last question that I kind of had then for the podcast here. So I remember when I listened to your friend's YouTube channel and you were discussing like more obscure characters that you really like enjoy. I remember you talked about the swordsman when he made his appearance on the Hawkeye show for I guess first appearing in that Avengers Annual you had discussed or recommended. So again, I wasn't really familiar with the swordsman character, but I mean, he was really cool in the Hawkeye show. I was actually impressed, and hopefully that they'll have further use for him. I guess his origin or backstory was changed slightly because I guess in the comics he had ties to Clinton Barton, but now we see in the MCU version he has more ties with Kate Bishop being like her stepdad. So my guess is since they have someone the caliber of Haley Atwell playing the Kate Bishop character. She'll probably be back for additional projects, and I'm going to assume that means he would be back as well. So I guess the question I kind of had for you is, are there any more obscure characters that you really enjoyed and you'd love to see, whether it's in a Disney Plus show or an HBO Max show, or even get their own movie?
Gosh, I mean, Swordsman is really a big one for me, just because he was such a any superhero that doesn't have any superpowers is always infinitely more interesting to me. And Swordsman, in the stuff that he did in the Avengers, he was definitely like a second, if not third tier character in the Avengers. And his story was that he was a bad guy and he was a villain, but he was really just sort of faking it. He did like sort of the double agent thing several times until he finally joined in the Avengers. And I think the annual that you're talking about, that was actually the Death of Swordsman. That was the Avengers annual #2.
Oh, okay, it's not his first appearance. Okay.
No, it's when he's killed. He later comes back as like this other but his death was a really big deal. And he is such a minor character, but when I did see him in Hawkeye, I just have my fingers crossed that we'll see him in some bigger stuff, because in the comics he ends up with Mantis, and if we were to see a character like we saw in the Hawkeye TV show end up in something like the Guardians of the Galaxy, palling around with Mantis and all those other characters, I just think that would be incredibly wild. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question, obscure characters that we haven't really seen yet that I want to see some more of. I know we're going to be seeing Submariner in some of the new projects. We did get a sneak peek of Reed Richards in Doctor Strange. Mm-hmm. Not that those are minor characters at all.
It is interesting that we've gone this long and hadn't seen them yet. So
it really is. So in Aquaman, there was always some really obscure side characters that I always liked. Aquaman, he has two sons. There's the son that he had, Arthur Jr., that was killed by Black Manta, which was a whole big storyline in and of itself. But again, going back to my guy Peter David, he had written in that Aquaman has another son whose name is Koryak. And Koryak was always just such an interesting character to me. And as soon as Peter David left the book, all the other writers, they either disregarded him completely or just completely wrote him out of the series. But he's an obscure character that I would really, really like to see come back. And they are doing so many interesting things with Aquaman and Jason Momoa and the DCU. Mm-hmm. He's someone that I'd like to see. So if we saw another Aquaman movie, I would love to see some of the lore behind some of those more obscure characters, people like the Sea Devils,
Mhm.
His Aquaman's father would be really cool. Um, Gosh, other obscure characters. Martian Manhunter. He's one who I don't know. I mean, if you're a big comic fan, I don't think anyone would necessarily call him obscure, but he never was really a mainstream kind of guy. And I absolutely loved seeing him. Did you see the Snyder recut of the
I
Justice
did,
League?
yeah, I did
Oh,
enjoy it. I had to watch it in installments because 4 hours is a long time, but I did watch it in installments and really enjoyed it. So,
I loved it too. I really loved it. I thought they did a really cool job with it, and redeemed a lot of the things that I did not like about the first cut of the movie.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it wasn't perfect. And I think the DC universe is still really kind of having a hard time picking up where they to where Marvel's at.
Uh-huh.
But Yeah, so more Aquaman stuff I think would be cool. But they have a lot of really neat and obscure characters I'd like to see some more of. Even in the Superman's bench, there's people I'd like to see. Blue Beetle, he's a character I'd really like to see. And I feel like I actually did.
I believe they're developing a project for him.
Aren't they?
Yeah, have you seen you seen the Cobra Kai show on Netflix, right?
No, I haven't.
Oh yeah, oh you should be watching it. It's pretty awesome.
What is it called?
Cobra Kai. The
Cobra
Karate
Kai.
Kid.
I'm sorry. I completely misheard you. I heard something else. Cobra Kai. Yeah. Okay.
So the Miguel character, I believe he's gonna be playing the Blue Beetle.
No, he's not.
Oh yeah, I believe.
Incredible.
Well, you know what? I mean, I know there could be some like restructuring or like things going on with the merger between Warner Brothers and Discovery, which led to like the cancellation of the Batgirl movie. So I mean, I'm hoping this project still makes it to light because it's going to be a really cool project if they do. But I understand certain things beyond our control can happen. So
I mean, between Batgirl getting canceled, did they cancel the Flash yet?
I don't know if they canceled yet, but that Ezra Miller guy is causing lots of problems for him. So
oh my god, yeah. So, who knows? Maybe they'll scrap everything completely, and we'll get to see some new stuff. But yeah, the Atom, he's a DC character. I'd really like to see some more of. Although I feel like they actually are. They don't. He might be even showing up on one of their shows that they've been doing. Yeah. Anyway, so
okay.
lots of little characters that I'd like to see some more of. But it's really the big characters that I'm more excited to see them get right. I want to see a good Green Lantern movie.
Oh yeah.
You know, hope that Marvel can keep up their steam. I wasn't pleased with Eternals. So it does make me a little nervous about things like Fantastic Four and all that good stuff. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's definitely a lot of rich history for both studios to draw from if they take the time to actually to do that. So, yeah, the future's bright. I think there's going to be lots of really cool stuff down the pipeline. Things to cool and check out hopefully in the next couple years.
Yeah. Other obscure stuff. I also really want to see DC get Robin right. There's always so much focus on Batman, and they'll redo Batman and they'll reboot him and they'll reboot him, and Batman and the Joker and all this other stuff. But I think Robin is really a character that I would like to see a lot more be done with, and has definitely been one of the most underutilized DC characters, considering how much they've done with Batman. Maybe I'm alone on that, but Robin, to me, is a much more interesting character than Batman has ever been. So that's something I really hope we see a bit more of. Sorry, backing up and answering your other question.
No, that sounds perfect. I totally agree. It'd actually be really cool to see a live action Robin movie, just Robin. I mean, not have to worry or rest on the merits of Batman, but let him do his thing. So
I'd be all for it. All for it.
Yeah. Well, that was pretty much all the questions I had today. I mean, we had just a few minutes left. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up or discuss in relations to comics?
No, man. I'm always looking for recommendations of new stuff. Like I said, I'm trying not to be that whatever generation I am, whether Gen X or millennial. Trying not to be that grump, who music doesn't sound like it used to, comics don't sound like they used to. So I am just trying to read some new stuff. So I'll just say, if you come across anything new that you're into that you want to pass along to me, definitely let me know, and I will read it, because I've been trying to get in some new stuff, but there is just so much out there right now. It can be really hard to absorb a lot of the content, and it's really the independent comic books that I think really need to be getting a lot more attention and a lot more love out there. So if you stumble across anything independent that you want to pass along to me, let me know, because that's where I think that's where I want to be reading more of. So that's where I'm at.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye out myself. In fact, I'm trying to also discover new independent stuff. But as far as mainstream stuff goes, yeah, definitely. If you get the chance, check out Batman 66, particularly the issues that were written by Kevin Smith and Ralph Garman. So,
I was picking up some of the Batman 66 stuff that they were doing just a couple of years ago. I don't know. As much as I'm not a huge Batman fan, that era, that Batman 66 and the Adam West Batman, that is my absolute favorite. That's some of the best Batman stuff to me, with the exception of the animated series.
Yeah.
I'll definitely check that out. And Green Hornet, I absolutely love. I could talk forever about old time radio dramas. We could do a whole episode based on that. But the Green Hornet radio show was always really, really good. And anytime he shows up in the comics, I think it's great. So I'll definitely pick up that book. That sounds really cool.
Oh, awesome. And actually, one last point then, because I mean, you just brought it up now. So I wanted, before we ran out of time, just that the animated Batman show was fantastic. I loved it. It was really great. And then one of my favorite episodes was when they introduced the character, the Gray Ghost, which was actually a radio show that Bruce Wayne listened to as a child.
Yes.
And growing up, Batman, he gets to team up with his idol, the Gray Ghost, which was really, really cool. So I actually like that idea. I think it'd be cool to learn more about the old radio programs, because, when we were teenagers, we got our fix through the comics, movies in the 90s. But back then, for kids who grow up, that's how they got their entertainment, through the radio. So to kind of hear more about that would be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, no, that Gray Ghost episode was really a lot of fun. Old time radio dramas from like the 30s and 40s. There is so much amazing stuff out there, whether it's science fiction, crime, mystery. They were doing incredible stuff on radio, which then quickly was eclipsed by television. And it's so funny to me that in the age of podcasts, and how popular those are and how popular audio are. We have yet to see like radio dramas really pick up steam. I mean, I know some people are doing it. Some people have some things that are similar to it, but it has. I don't know. It has yet to really hit the mainstream again. So anytime you want to talk about that, I'm all for it. I don't know if we're going to revive old time radio drama, just the two of us, but I got a lot of recommendations, and there's some really cool stuff out there.
Okay, awesome. So we'll definitely get together and do that for another podcast. So I'm really looking forward to chatting with you again, and glad to see you're doing well. Glad to see everything's going well with you.
Yeah, likewise. You too. This was great. Thank you very much for having me again. Anytime.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, yeah, we'll touch base and we'll put together another episode, hopefully in the near future. So that should be pretty fun.
I'd love that.
All right, thanks again, Peter, for joining me today. And you've been listening to the Casting for Fun podcast. Thanks, everybody.